Hello viewers! Thank you for tuning in for the next video in my Replica Championship Belt review series. This belt! If you have watched some of my older videos on a variety of other topics, you may see this belt pop up from time to time. I bought this belt over 20 years ago. And so it has historical meaning to me, it has historical significance to me, because back in that day, back in 2003, it wasn't even like you can go on Amazon. I don't even think Amazon probably existed, but it was just selling books or was just starting to get into the retail business. You could just go online and buy a championship belt. So if you were a wrestling fan in the late and early 90s, growing up as a kid in the 80s, you had to make your own belt when you were a kid. I remember making one out of cardboard and I cut apart what are those? Those little pockets you used to run around your. Why am I blanking on this? Anyway, I cut apart an old belt pocket thing that you put around your waist. I cut it apart and then I used that as the strap, and then I drew my own championship belt on cardboard and stapled it to that thing. And that's what you did. Or you got like the cheap styrofoam ones that the WWE would sell in the 80s. But to get your hands on a real metal championship belt, that was like, you had to be like a hardcore collector in the 80s and know some people, and maybe you get lucky and find one as a kid, with parents that are not going to spend their discretionary income on stupid championship belts. You were not going to get your hands on one. And then again, the early 2000s hit, the internet hit, e-commerce hit, and I found a website that would sell a belt, and this one happened to be on sale. It was like a 2-for-1 sale, and I was able to get this one, and I got my friend a UFC heavyweight championship belt, and I was so excited. I was so excited to have this belt, and we had this dream when we were college students to be able to walk the streets with championship belts and be like, yo, I have a championship belt. So I bought this belt, and then I grew up and grew out of it, and all of the things, and this belt just sat in a closet for 20 years. And the reason why I took it out, to be honest with all of you, is when I bought this belt, it was a reward to myself for dropping some weight. And even when I bought it, I remember it didn't fit around my waist, but I got to that point where it did. And then I gained some weight, and it didn't fit around my waist again, and then this belt went into a closet to be embarrassed. And every once in a while I would pull it out, but the reality is I didn't love having it around because it was a reminder of my own personal failures. But I recently dropped a couple of pounds, and I took the belt back out, and lo and behold, it fit my waist again, and it made me happy. And it kind of instigated me going out and buying these cheap Pakistani knockoffs, which, to be honest with you, didn't really scratch the itch for me as far as like, oh cool, I bought these belts because they're super, super cheap. But this one, in comparison, I just kind of wanted to put this out there. I don't think you can get this version of the belt at this point anymore unless you find it on eBay or something like that, because it's so old. It's legitimately 20-something years old. And I will show you. I would say that the etching on the belt is actually quite good. Even though it's a 2mm plate, I feel like it's a little bit more detailed than the Intercontinental Championship from my previous video. So I feel like this one's a little bit more detailed. These pieces right here have a little bit more detail than the sides of the Intercontinental belt. I should also say that the Intercontinental belt, this US Championship, this version of it, is definitely a reflection. It is kind of a ripoff of the WWF Intercontinental belt. You'll see this in the ribbon, right? This is almost exactly the same on the Intercontinental belt. I'll show that in a second. So they're very, very similar belts. They're very similar designs, if I'm not mistaken. I think the guy's name is Dave McMillan. He was the designer of both belts. So I would say that this is pretty good. The belt's pretty nice. Now, if you notice that you only get one side plate with this one, which was kind of a common recurring theme with the WWF. Now, one thing you will notice is that the leather is starting to go on the belt, right? It's starting to crack here and bubble. It's all starting to crack here and bubble. Yeah, it's starting to crack here too, right? So the leather's starting to go. I will look into a re-leathering for this one. And again, this was an official WWE shop. You will see on the back, unlike those other belts that I showed the last couple weeks, you'll see that this one is an official WWF WWE replica belt. For nostalgia reasons, I will probably get this belt releathered. I don't think I would get rid of this one. I will be honest with you. It wasn't like this belt, like the Intercontinental belt. If the Intercontinental belt was on sale, I would have bought that one back 20 years ago. This wasn't like, oh my God, this is my favorite belt. It was because it was cheap and it was available that I bought it. But it was close enough to the Intercontinental belt that I was like, this is a cool belt. But, you know, it's like choosing to be Robin instead of Batman. Like, why would you go out and buy a mid-card championship instead of the heavyweight championship kind of thing? So, yeah. But, I mean, it was fun. It's been fun to have the belt, but I also reached this epiphany, and I guess I should talk about that too, because I made a video sort of, you can go back on my channels, and sort of saying, like to walk around with a championship belt is kind of weird, because most of us haven't done anything to earn a championship belt. Like, we're not wrestlers, we're just people walking around. So I went to a wrestling event in like the Wildwood, New Jersey boardwalk. They used to run these events at the convention center in Wildwood, and it was super easy to bring my kid to. And I saw these people walking down the boardwalk with these championship belts, and I'm like, man, something kind of just rubbed me the wrong way about it. It just felt like it was like, hey, you know, and they had two belts. They're like, you know, they're shotgunning. You know, they're walking down the street with like these two belts on their arms, right? And they're like, yo, what's up? And, you know, that was the dream 20-something years ago. Wouldn't it be cool to walk down the street with a championship belt? And then you could realize that dream, and you're kind of like, should you be doing that? I don't know. I don't want to be judgmental about it, but I don't know. Something just feels icky about the whole thing. So I have been confused about my desire to collect these things, and they've been sort of hidden in a closet. And again, I just started buying some of these again, and this is kind of a regret too, because it was cheap, but we'll figure that out. There's probably going to be future videos discussing how I rectify these situations. But again, I do want to highlight the fact that if you look, you'll see the ribbons and the heavyweight champion, right? They're exactly the same. And again, these designs are very, very similar. Same thing like with the stars, right? It's because it's the same designer did both of these belts. And I think some of the history about the design of these belts and why they did what they did, that's just as interesting to me as like having them. Like, you know, I'd like the stories behind the belts. So, like again, I put this in here because it's part of the story, right, of these 4 videos that I'm doing about the belts. It would be hard to tell the story without discussing this belt, but this isn't a belt that's currently available. This particular version, this official version, is not on the WWE shop. There are makers on the internet that there are 4mm and 6mm versions of this belt. I guess they're bootlegs, I guess they're knockoffs, I don't know, but they look a lot nicer than this one, to be honest with you, and I bet you the leather's nicer too. So you can score a version of this belt that's actually a lot nicer than this one, and it probably, you know, it's not like gonna break the bank. There are like $300 versions of it. There is like a $700 version that I saw, which again, even for $700, for something that's a 6mm plate, you know, if it's a reputable builder or maker or whatever you want to say, you know, if this is your favorite belt, I would go for that. This belt is over 20 years old. I purchased this belt over 20 years ago, and it has been sitting in a closet. This was the first championship belt that I ever bought. I'll get into all that, or I probably will have already gotten into that with this video. But this belt, I would say, is a lot less forgiving as far as getting it around the waist. These cheap Pakistani knockoffs were a lot more forgiving for the waistline. So I purchased this belt years and years ago because I lost some weight and I wanted to give myself a reward. And even when I bought it, I was down 80 pounds and I still couldn't fit in this belt, but eventually I could fit into it. And then I got fat again and I couldn't fit into it. And then I lost some weight and I could fit into it. And that was a whole thing that sort of triggered all of these belts being bought. But this is it around the waist. You know, championship belts, yay! Who doesn't like championship belts? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't like them, but I like them, and I'm glad that I have some. Thank you for watching this video. I got one more, that one's a doozy. So stick with me, people. Last belt coming up. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next week, number 4.